And that's fine, I think. You can go up a little higher, maybe? Well, let's see if I can see it, that's the main thing. It's okay. Just maybe about, like, that much, if you could. Otherwise, it's fine. We don't have to. All right, so Hare Krishna, good morning, and Mokshara Akadashi Jai, and Sri Gita Jayanti Ki Jai. So, I'm just going to sing the Hare Krishna Mahamantra 3 times, because it's not actually a regular Bhagavatam class with a verse, although there will be a Bhagavatam verse in the class, along with a Gita verse. It's not really a class. Yesterday, because we were reading the beautiful Lilamrita, and from that era, I was thinking about another era that started in '66, in December '66 actually, and went on to the point where we went to the UK and Srila Prabhupada was introduced to the Beatles, and particularly among those very famous at the time and still famous people was Sriman George Harrison, as Prabhupada would affectionately call him. So I'm going to speak a little bit about Srila Prabhupada and George Harrison at that time. So that's why I say it's not exactly a regular Bhagavatam class, but there is a verse from the Gita and the Bhagavatam. And instead of the Jairada Madhava, we'll just chant 3 times the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. Okay? Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Jai Om Om Shri Vishnupad Paramahansa Parabhadakacharya Satara, His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki. ISKCON BBT Founder Acharya, His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Gaur Premanandi Hari Hari Bol. All glories, all glories, all glories to the assembled devotees. All glories, all glories, all glories to the lotus feet of Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga. So to give a little background premise, on a very cold December night, it was a nighttime in New York City. It was in 1966, and a very elderly Indian Swami climbed into a Volkswagen van. So I asked the other day, how many people know what a Volkswagen van is nowadays? You know, they were the preferred, like if you wanted to get something in those days and you were a counterculture person, Volkswagen vans were what you wanted. And then quite often they would be repainted into very colorful designs all over the van, you know. So this elderly Swami, he gets into this Volkswagen van, and there were about 15 of his new followers in the van with instruments, including a harmonium that was being loaned by Allen Ginsberg, who was an early advocate of the Swami and the chanting. And they drove uptown to a recording studio, which was near Times Square. So Times Square in New York is like a world-renowned landmark, you can say. Notably for Christmas Eve, there's this big ball that comes down, counting down, you know, the minutes, the seconds till the new year. And they weren't professional musicians, none of them, but within a few hours they recorded an LP, a long play. That means if you're too young, you wouldn't know. It's like a large vinyl disc with a hole in the middle of it. And they're played on, you know, a record player. So, and actually these things are making a comeback now because the sound is considered to be superior. So there's actually a whole subculture of LPs and 45s, which were the smaller one, but the vinyl disc is making a comeback. So within a few hours, they had recorded this LP, and even the producer was excited about it. So it was special, because it was more than just music. It was chanting, it was meditation, it was worship. And a few months after that, a letter arrived at the small storefront temple in New York's Lower East Side. And maybe it was a few weeks. But someone had heard the album, and they told the Beatles about it. And they ordered 100 copies. So that's how the first connection actually occurred with George and the Hare Krishna Mahamantra. So George was speaking with Mukunda Goswami. It was kind of like a little interview, and it was post-Prabhupada, after his departure. And he was telling some of his striking experiences he'd had while chanting the Hare Krishna Mahamantra. And he revealed some of his realizations about the chanting and the philosophy of Krishna consciousness, and how he felt about having helped the devotees expand the movement in England. And he talked about how he really appreciated prasadam, and most of all, how he deeply appreciated the movement's founder, Srila Prabhupada. So he would recall that this was like in about maybe November 1980, and he recalled the impression Srila Prabhupada's album, and the name of the album, by the way, was called Krishna Consciousness. And the record label was called Happening. So most of the time we just would refer, the Happening album, you know. So he said, I remember singing it the Hare Krishna Mahamantra, singing it just for days. John and I, with ukulele banjos, sailing through the Greek islands. Hare Krishna. Like 6 hours we sang because you couldn't stop. Once you started going, you just couldn't stop. It was like as soon as you would stop, the lights went out. So that was George's first profound experience, and he hadn't met the devotees yet. So, in fact, when he first met the devotees, it was Shyam Sundar in the UK. And there was a situation where Shyam Sundar got to get in with some other people we knew from San Francisco, some other musicians, and they had an appointment to meet the Beatles. And Shyam said, do you mind, because we knew them, do you mind if I tag along? Oh, sure, come on. And so he's sitting there in this room, and it turned out there was a lot of other people that had appointments to meet the Beatles, or at least they hoped that would happen. So one by one, the Beatles would like walking, they'd open a door, look in, and one by one, like shoot through that room. They wouldn't look right or left. And the last one was George, and he was shooting through the room, and suddenly he spied Shyam Sundar, and he goes up, he goes, I've been looking for you, man. Why was he looking for us? Because he'd heard that there were some of these people in town, these Krishna people, and they had played their record so much it had worn out, because there's a little needle that goes in the grooves. So he wanted another copy of the record. He'd worn out the record. Anyways, Prabhupada wrote in a letter, was in June of 69. So we arrived in the UK in the later part, not later, it was like September of 68. Prabhupada wrote, I'm very glad to know that George is interested in recording some Hare Krishna some Krishna consciousness album. And it's very happy news. I request you, through your friends, to try to make a nice Hare Krishna record. I have all encouragement for this purpose. Try to make this Hare Krishna movement popular through any source that is possible. That is our business. So Prabhupada was not at all adverse to using other techniques and means to spread the Hare Krishna movement. And there is a verse from the Bhagavatam 4:29-5 that the word pramada mentioned in this regard refers to material intelligence or ignorance. It is to be understood as such. When one takes shelter of this kind of intelligence, he identifies himself with the material body, influenced by the material consciousness of I and mine. He begins to enjoy and suffer through his senses, and thus the living entity is entrapped. And in the purport, Prabhupada mentions immaterial existence, the living entity falsely claims things to be his. He thinks, I'm the monarch of all I survey. This is ignorance. Actually, nothing belongs to him. Even the body and the senses do not belong to him, for they're given to him by the grace of the Lord to satisfy his different propensities through the material energy. Nothing actually belongs to the living entity. He becomes mad after everything, claiming, this is mine, this is mine, this is mine. So nasya mahoyam maham mamekti. So this is called illusion. Nothing belongs to the living entity, but he claims everything belongs to him. So the last song recorded by the Beatles was I, Me, Mine. And it showed the influence of these verses in Srila Prabhupada's purport. I'll just say a couple lines from that song. Maybe some of you know that song. It's all through the day, I, me, mine, I, me, mine, I, me, mine. All through the night, I, me, mine, I, me, mine, I, me, mine. Prabhupada commented, I think George does not require to become my formal disciple because he's already more than my disciple. He has sympathy for my movement, and I have all blessings for him. And then he continued, regarding how George may continue his meditation. So this is a very nice instruction. It was in a letter, but it was conveyed to George. He may continue his meditation. That meditation may be done by keeping one picture of Krishna, keeping his mind concentrated on the picture of Krishna, and softly chanting the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra for as long as he likes. So he didn't say even 16 rounds, he used to be just chanting for as long as he likes, concentrating on the picture of Krishna. So that will complete both his meditation and Krishna consciousness perfectly, according to the last verse in the 6th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, which says, "End of all yogis, he always abides in me with great faith, worshiping me in transcendental loving service, is most intimately united with me in yoga, and that is the highest of all." So when Prabhupada arrived at the manor, so you all know there was this wonderful building that was gifted by George, known as Bhaktivedanta Manor. The original name was Pigott's Manor, and it had gone through different metamorphoses. So the last one had been kind of like a convent, and one by one, all the nuns were dying off. It was to the point there was nobody able to maintain or keep the place up, and they decided to sell it. So Prabhupada mentioned, given the facility of assembling in this nice house, this good boy, George Harrison, we must give him all glories. We must be thankful to him that he's given us this facility, and Krishna will bless him more and more. So one aspect of Srila Prabhupada's magnanimous personality was that he was always grateful when somebody would offer some assistance. And he's very clearly expressing that gratitude here. And he's telling that we must be thankful to him, you know. Because sometimes we kind of slip into this mentality, you know, if somebody gives something, well, you know, of course they should because they can afford it, or, you know, something like that. But no, if somebody gives something, we should be grateful for them. And Prabhupada always had that mindset and would instruct us in the same way. So then George Harrison comes and Prabhupada says, "Hare Krishna Jai." When I first entered this room, I said, "All glory is to George Harrison." And he laughed. He's speaking about, he's up in his room at that point. "Yes, you have given us this shelter, and Krishna will give you shelter at his lotus feet. We shall always pray like that." You know. And just before Srila Prabhupada left this world in 1977, he removed a ring from the finger of his right hand, and he told the disciples, "This is for George, give it to him." You know. A lot of times people they were, you know, at Prabhupada, different times he'd have all these rings. It wasn't like he had this thing about rings. It was because people would meet Srila Prabhupada and spontaneously they wanted to give him something, but they're on the spot. And quite often they'd have a ring, and they would just take it off and give it to him. One day this lady, Indian lady, had these very nice, elaborate 24-karat gold bangles, and she was so overtaken with appreciation for Prabhupada, she just took them off and gave them to him. And of course, Prabhupada wasn't going to wear bangles, so later on, in appreciation for Arundhati's service, Arundhati was the wife of Pradyumna, and she did what's it called when you go from the transcribing of Prabhupada's early books. So he gave to her in appreciation. And the same with the rings. He didn't keep them, he didn't flaunt them. So even myself, one time, I had brought some deities at his request, and they were placed in front of his desk in Mumbai. I was staying in this apartment at a place called Seaface Park, and that was when Juhu was in our possession, but not yet prepared for living. and we were having a big program in town in Bombay, the second big Pandal program, as we would call them. And the deities were brought before him, and he was so happy, like he wanted them right in front of his desk in his room. So then he said to me, hold out your hand. And I held out my hand, and he took off a ring, and he put it in my hand and said, see if it fits. So it did fit on the middle finger. If I show the middle finger, then it'll look rude. But anyways, so he didn't have a personal attachment for flashy jewelry. Another thing was the watches. You always see him with a watch, right? And devotees would have a little competition. They would buy him a new watch, because quite often then he'd take off the old one and just hand it. So they would be hoping they would get a watch, a Maha watch. But what was Prabhupada? He was really punctual about time. It wasn't an adornment. He was very punctual, like down to the minute, down to the second. If you cooked for him, you brought it in on time. One time Shruti Rupa said, he was like running a little late, like Prabhupada said, what is it, 3 minutes? No, 3 seconds. It was like 3 seconds. He said, you have to eat when the fire is there. The fire of the hunger is fire in the belly. So these watches, these rings, these things, they weren't a personal type of attraction or attachment to jewelry or other things. They were, for Prabhupada, somebody gift, he accepted the gift, but he would also give it out. And same with the watches, but the watches kept the time, very punctual. So he gave the ring on his deathbed. He was going to give to George, his appreciation. So our position in this, that we are in the material world, George has sung, I'm living in the material world. Yes, very sensible song. He's a good boy, realizing, yes. So this material life is not good. Material life is not good in this sense because you have to change your body. Sometimes good birth, sometimes not good birth, sometimes Englishmen, sometimes cats and dogs. Possibility, because after death, you'll get a body that will be chosen not by you, but by material nature. You'll create your body by present activities, and nature will simply award you that body. Many, many people would come to visit Prabhupada, and one was a teacher who was very interested and attentive. Sometimes people came just out of fascination, but this person had an interest in the actual Krishna conscious philosophy, and his name was David Lawrence. And he was telling an experience that he had, that one of the boys from his class, he was found, they had in the library, they had a music library, so he was found listening to George Harrison's record. And he was listening to the recording in the music room. They had big speakers, and he was reading the words, and he put the words down. And David said, I was watching him. And Prabhupada said, I'm in the material world, so it was identifying that song. David said, yes, living in the material world. Prabhupada, that is a very nice song. So just a couple lines from that one, because you can see Prabhupada's influence. This is the point. I'm living in the material world, Can't say what I'm doing here, but I hope to see much clearer after living in the material world. While I'm living in the material world, not much giving in the material world, got a lot of work to do, try to get the message through and get back out of this material world. I hope to get out of this place by Lord Sri Krishna's grace. So David continued, he was listening, and David saw this boy, he was like praying. So then after the boy came out of the room, he goes, what are you doing there? And this kid says, this record has been a complete experience for me. We could see George's efforts to encode Krishna consciousness in his music were having an effect and did have an effect. The Mukunda had asked George, from the very start, you always felt comfortable. Did you always felt comfortable around the devotees? And George said, the first time I met Shyam Sundar, I liked him. He was my pal. I knew that Shyam Sundar and all of you were in my age group. But the only difference really was you'd already joined and I hadn't. I was in a rock band, but I didn't have any fear because I'd seen dhotis, your robes, and the saffron color and the shaved heads in India. Krishna consciousness was especially good for me because I didn't get the feeling that I'd have to shave my head and move into a temple and do it full time. So it was a spiritual thing that just fit in with my lifestyle. I could still be a musician, but I just changed my consciousness, that's all. And then he responded to, how do you feel about, being part of, and he says, actually it gives me pleasure. The idea that I was fortunate enough to be able to help at that time. All those songs with spiritual themes were like little plugs. My sweet Lord and others. And now I know that people are much more respectful and accepting when it comes to seeing the devotees in the streets and all that. It's no longer like something out of left field. I've given lots of Prabhupada's books to many people, and whether they ever read them or not, it's good to know they've gotten them. And if they read them, their lives may be changed. The Mukunda commented, Srila Prabhupada always trained us to stick to our principles. He said the worst thing we could do would be make some sort of compromise to dilute the philosophy for the sake of cheap popularity. Although many swamis and yogis came from India to the West, Srila Prabhupada was the only one with the purity and devotion to establish India's ancient Krishna conscious philosophy around the world on its own terms, not watered down, but as it is. And George responded, that's right. He was a perfect example of what he preached. Someone could ask him, how did you feel about financing the first printing of the Krishna book and writing the introduction? I think probably most of you know that story, how that happened. So George said, I just felt like it was part of my job, Wherever I go in the world, when I see devotees, I always say Hare Krishna to them, and they're always pleased to see me. It's a nice relationship, whether they really know me personally or not. They feel they know me, and they do, really. And Mukunda mentioned, well, at lunch today, we spoke a little about prasadam. George, well, we should try to see God in everything, so it helps so much having the food to taste. Let's face it, if God's in everything, why shouldn't you taste him when you eat? I think the prasadam is a very important thing. Krishna is God, so he's absolute. His name, his form, his prasadam, it's all him. They say the way to a man's heart is through his stomach. So if you can get to a man's spirit soul by eating and it works, why not do it? There's nothing better than having been chanting and dancing or just sitting and talking philosophy, and then suddenly the devotees come out with prasadam. It's a blessing from Krishna and it's spiritually important. The idea is that prasadam, the sacrament that Christians talk about, only instead of being a wafer, it's a whole feast, really. And the taste is so nice. It's out of this world. Mukunda said, well, the Vedic literature reveal that prasadam conveys spiritual realization, just as chanting does. You make spiritual advancement just by eating it. And George said, well, I'd say from my experience that it definitely works. I've always enjoyed prasadam, even more when I've been at the temple or when I've actually been sitting with Prabhupada than when somebody brought it to me. Sometimes you can sit there with prasadam and then you find that 3 or 4 hours have gone by and you didn't even know it. Prasadam really helped me a lot because you start to realize now I'm tasting Krishna. George, you and John Lennon met Srila Prabhupada together when he stayed at John's home in September of '69. That's when we had all moved there temporarily while we were waiting for the Berry Place Center to be renovated. So George said, yes, but, and this is really a very sweet and important part. When I first met him, I underestimated him. I didn't realize it then. But I see now that because of him, the mantra has spread so far in the last 16 years, more than it had in the last 5 centuries. Now that's pretty amazing, because he was getting older and older, yet he was writing his books all of the time. I realized later on that he was much more incredible than what you could see from the surface. What stands out about him most in your mind? George responded, the thing that always stays is his saying, I am the servant of the servant of the servant. I like that. A whole lot of people say, I'm it, I'm the divine incarnation, I'm here and let me hip you. You know what I mean? But Prabhupada was never like that. I liked Prabhupada's humbleness. I always liked his humility and his simplicity. The servant of the servant of the servant is really what it is. None of us are God, just his servants. And he always tried to make me feel so comfortable. I always felt very relaxed with him. And I felt more like a friend. I felt like he was a good friend. Even though he was at the time 79 years old, practically working all through the night, day after day, with very little sleep, he still didn't come across as though he was a highly educated intellectual being, because he had a sort of childlike simplicity. It was great. It was fantastic. So Mukunda mentioned him in one of his books. Srila Prabhupada said that your sincere service was better than some people who'd delve more deeply into Krishna consciousness but could not maintain the level of commitment. How did you feel about this? George said, very wonderful. Really, I mean, it gave me hope. Because as they say, even one moment in the company of a divine person, Krishna's pure devotee, can help a tremendous amount. And if I didn't get feedback from Prabhupada on my songs about Krishna or the philosophy, I'd get it from the devotees. That's all the encouragement I needed, really. It just seemed that anything spiritual I did, either through the songs or helping, publishing the books or whatever, really pleased him. The song I wrote, Living in the Material World, as I wrote in I, Me, Mine, was influenced by Srila Prabhupada. He's the one who explained to me how we're not these physical bodies. That was the thing about Prabhupada, you see. He didn't just talk about loving Krishna and getting out of the place. He was the perfect example. He talked about always chanting, and he was always chanting. I think that in itself was perhaps the most encouraging thing for me. It was enough to make me try harder, to be just a little bit better. He was a perfect example of everything he preached. Srila Prabhupada has already had an amazing effect on the world. There's no way of measuring it. One day I just realized, oh my God, this man is amazing. He would sit up all night translating Sanskrit into English, putting glossaries to make sure everybody could understand it. And he never came off as someone above you. He always had that childlike simplicity. That's the most amazing, and what's the most amazing thing is the fact he did all this translating in a relatively short time, just a few years. And without anything more than his own Krishna consciousness, he rounded up all these thousands of devotees, set the whole movement into motion, which became something so strong that it's going on even after he left. And it's still escalating, even at an incredible rate. It will go on and on from the knowledge he gave. It can only grow and grow. The more people wake up spiritually, the more they'll realize the depth of what Srila Prabhupada was saying and how much he gave. So that was really a beautiful appreciation of seeing how this movement had continued, was growing, is growing, and will continue in spite of our bumbling and stumbling. So Mukunda said, did you know that complete sets of Srila Prabhupada's books are in the major colleges and universities, Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Oxford, Cambridge, and the Sorbonne, all around the world? And George said, they should be. His contribution has obviously been enormous from the literary point of view because he's brought the Supreme Person, Krishna, into focus. A lot of scholars and writers, they know Bhagavad Gita, but only on an intellectual level. Even when they write, Krishna said, they don't do it with bhakti or love. That's the secret, you know. Krishna is actually a person who is the Lord and who will also appear there in that book when there is that love, that bhakti. You can't understand the first thing about God unless you love him. A lot of people, when they just get started in spiritual life, worship God as impersonal. So what's the difference between worshiping Krishna, our God, in his personal form, and worshiping his impersonal nature as energy and light? I mean, we know people nowadays, even devotees, I'm sorry to say, I'm sending you energy and light. I'm sending you love and light. Prabhupada was not a love and light guru. He was Krishna. He was giving Krishna. So George got that right away. And it said it's like the difference between hanging out with a computer or hanging out with a person. Like I said earlier, if there's a God, I want to see him. Not only his energy or his light, but him. And then Mukunda mentioned, I don't think it's possible to calculate just how many people were turned on to Krishna consciousness by your song, My Sweet Lord. Why did you feel you wanted to put Hare Krishna in the album? Wouldn't Hallelujah alone have been enough? And George has a very wonderful answer. Well, first of all, Hallelujah is a joyous expression that Christians have, but Hare Krishna has a mystical side to it. It's more than just glorifying God, it's asking to become his servant. And because of the way the mantra is put together with the mystical spiritual energy contained in those syllables, it's much closer to God than the way the Christianity currently seems to representing him. Then he explained, my idea in My Sweet Lord, because it sounded like a pop song, was to sneak up on them a bit. The point was to have people not offended by inserting Hallelujah. And by the time it gets to Hare Krishna, they're already hooked, their feet are tapping, and they're already singing Hallelujah, and suddenly it turns into Hare Krishna. And they're singing along before they know what happened. So George had this very definite, it wasn't just a song. He was thinking how to capture, Strategic planning, we call it nowadays. Then Mukunda asked, when you were in Vrindavan, India, where Lord Krishna appeared, and you saw thousands of people chanting Hare Krishna, did it strengthen your faith and the idea of chanting to see a whole city living Hare Krishna? And George replied, yeah, it fortifies you. It definitely helped. It's fantastic to be in a place where the whole town is doing it. And I also had the idea, they were knocked out at the idea of seeing some white persons chanting on beads. Vrindavan is one of the most holy cities in India. Everywhere, everyone chanting Hare Krishna. It was my most fantastic experience. So then Mukunda said, you wrote in your book, most of the world is fooling about, especially the people who think they're in control of the world and the community. The presidents, the politicians, the military, etc., they're all jerking about, acting as if they're the Lord over their own domains. That's basically problem one on the planet. So that was, George had written that down, and George says, that's right. Unless you're doing some kind of God consciousness thing, and you know that he's the one who's really in charge, you're just building up a whole lot of karma and not really helping yourself or anyone else. There's a point in me where it's beyond sad, seeing the state of the world today. I think we can relate to that now, can't we? Like, beyond sad, seeing the state of the world today. It's so screwed up. It's terrible, and it'll be getting worse and worse. More concrete everywhere, more pollution, more radioactivity. There's no wilderness left, no pure air. They're chopping down the forests. They're polluting all the oceans. In one sense, I'm pessimistic about the future of the planet. These big guys don't realize that for everything they do, there's a reaction. You have to pay. That's karma. So Mukunda asked, well, do you think there's any hope? Yes. One by one, everybody's got to escape Maya. Everybody has to burn out his karma and escape reincarnation and all that. Stop thinking that if Britain or America or Russia or the West or whatever becomes superior, then we'll all have a rest and live happily ever after. It doesn't work. The best thing you can do is God consciousness. Manifest your own divinity first. The truth is there. It's right there within us all. Understand what you are. If people would just wake up to what's real, there would be no misery in the world. And chanting is a pretty good place to start. So then Mukunda, that was the end. He said, thank you so much, George. And George responded, all right, Hare Krishna. So I think that, actually in 94, there's been the accumulation of a 10-year battle to get the manor, like they were trying to close down the manor. And it became a worldwide effort. The British Parliament, the Indian Parliament, it was a huge thing. And finally, there was victory. And Shamsundar Mukunda presented George with a small Prabhupada murti, and had a little Prabhupada hat, glasses, a bead bag, a little book stand with a miniature Bhagavad Gita, a little Vyasa sign, a sannyasi danda, a little pair of kartals. And George was, like described, Dhananjaya said he was cradling Prabhupada in his hands, and he goes, I'm going to take Prabhupada home tonight. He's coming home with me. I didn't want to say anything, but now I feel I must, because there was this big event. So George, actually during this whole time, George hadn't actually given any visible support, either verbally or in the press or in any other way. But he said, I was following on television and in the papers. I knew what was going on. And in the back of my mind, I thought, if it didn't work out and you had to close the manor, you could move over to my place in Henley and take over Friar Park. That was his estate. That could be your new temple. He was so moved by what he heard that evening. He was just speaking from his heart, and everybody just started clapping like anything. And actually, his wife, she hadn't been particularly inclined to the devotees at all. And Dhananjaya said whenever he'd have to make a call, he was just praying that she wouldn't, answer the phone. That night, her heart got melted also. So as George wrote in the little, like a little preface, little intro to the Krishna book, everyone is looking for Krishna. Some realize it, that they are, and some don't. Krishna is God, the source of all that exists, the cause of all that is, was, or ever will be. And then, there's some more part, is it? I request you all to take advantage of this book, Krishna, and enter into its understanding. I also request you to make an appointment to meet your God now through the self-liberating process of yoga union, and give peace a chance. All you need is love. Krishna, Haribol, George Harrison, the 31st of March, 1970. So happened, not last night we stayed here, but the night before we stayed at a hotel around Beckley. And then we came down, they have like a breakfast room, and we brought all of our, devotees always travel with a lot of prasadams. We bring ours, and we're sitting there, and there were some bookshelves. And Sarah spotted the Krishna book, and I think it was the Science of Self-Realization the Gita. So Krishna book and the Gita were on the shelf in this hotel, and I'm just thinking, look what Prabhupada has done. So His Divine Grace, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Thank you very much for your attention. You all have no, it was what's it called? something in and sweet. It wasn't sleep in. It was a nicer. It was nicer than we would just take the three of us were paying. So then, divided by three, it was less costly.
Adipurusham Tamaham Bhajami Govindam Adipurusham Tamaham Bhajami Govindam Adipurusham Tamaham Bhajami Marhavatam Samasitam Buddha Sundaram Kandar Agom Vidamaniya Vishesha Shobha Govindam Adipurusham Tamaham Bhajami Govindam Adipurusham Tamaham Bhajami Govindam Adipurusham Tamaham Bhajami Angani Asa Sakalen Priya Priti Manti Lasyan Dipan Kayanti Chiram Naganti Ananda Chinmaya Sadhu Jala Vigrahasya Govindam Adipurusham Tamaham Bhajami Govindam Adipurusham Tamaham Bhajami Govindam Adipurusham Tamaham Bhajami Govindam Adipurusham Tamaham Bhajami.
Tonight they're going to seal up that thing because we have a fire sacrifice tonight. All right. Namaho Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prastaya Mutale Shrimate Bhakti Vedanta Samaniti Namane Namaste Saraswati Devi Gurumani Vajat Nivesesha Shunyavadi Matsya Jagat Desatarane Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shidwaita Kadar Sivasati Gauravat Vrinda Jaya Sri Krishna Chaitanya Ramanityananda Sri Advaita Radha Shiva Sati Gaur Bhakta Vrinda. Jaya Sri Krishna Chaitanya Ramanityananda Sri Advaita Radha Shiva Sati Gaur Bhakta Vrinda. Shri Krishna Chaitanya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Ramanityananda Sri Advaita Radha Shiva Sati Gaur Bhakta Vrinda. Chaitanya Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Ati Ate, Ati Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama,
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Krishna, Krishna, Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Govinda Jaya Jaya, Gopala Jaya Jaya, Radha Ramana Hare, Govinda Jaya Jaya. Govinda Jaya Jaya, Gopala Jaya Jaya, Radha Ramana Hare, Govinda Jaya Jaya. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Nayarat, Hagolokananaran, Hagolokananat, Ragate. Nayarat, Hagolokananaran, Hagolokananat, Ragate. Nayarat, hey, Rade, Nayarade, Nayaragate. Nayarad, hey, Rade, Nayarade, Nayaragate. Jirat, hey, Jai Om.
Cheto darpanam marjanam bhavamahadavagni nirvapanam Shreya Kairavya Chandrika Vitaranam Vidyavadu Jivanam Anandam Buddhi Vardhanam Pratipanam Purnamrita Swadanam Sarvatma Snapanam Param Vijayate Shri Krishna Sankirtanam Nam Namakari Bahudani Jasarva Shaktis Tatrapita Niyamita Smarane Nakala Etadrishita Vakriba Bhagavan Mamapi Durdaiva Midrishami Hajjanina Nuraga Api Sunichena Tarorapi Sahishuna Amanina Manadena Kirtaniya Sadahari Nadanam Najanam Nasundarim Kavitam Vajagadisha Kamae Mama Janmani Janmani Ishvare Bhavatad Bhakti Ahoitaki Twai Ainanda Tanuja Kinkaram Patitam Mam Vishame Bhavam Buddha Kripayata Bhavata Pankaja Stita Duli Sadrashim Vachintaya Nayanam Kalashu Daraya Varanam Vadganaradaya Gira Pulakarnishitam Bhatukada Tavanamagrahane Bhavishyati Yugayatam Namishena Chakshusha Pravashayatam Shunayatam Jagat Sarvam Govindam Virahename Ashlishyavapadamratam Panastumam Adarshanam Marmahata Karotuva Yatatatava Vidadaturam Pato Matprananatastu Saevanapara. Victory to the Sri Krishna Sankirtan, which cleanses the dust of all which cleanses the heart of all the dust accumulated for years and extinguishes the fire of conditional life of repeated birth and death. This Sankirtan movement is the prime benediction for humanity at large because it spreads the rays of the benediction moon. It is the life of all transcendental knowledge. It increases the ocean of transcendental bliss, and it enables us to fully taste the nectar for which we are always anxious. O my Lord, congregational chanting of your holy name alone can render all benediction to living beings, and thus you have hundreds and millions of names like Krishna and Govinda. In these transcendental names, you've invested all your transcendental energies. There are not even hard and fast rules for chanting.